Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because today we're diving into a car that most people have completely forgotten about. But trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this machine was absolutely crucial to American history. We're talking about the 1952 Ford Mainline. Now, before you click away thinking, boring, hear me out. This isn't just another vintage car story. This is the story of your grandfather's America, and I guarantee there are facts about this car that are going to blow your mind. All right, let's set the stage. Picture this. It's 1952. America is 7 years removed from World War II, but the Korean War has the nation on edge again. Steel is rationed, materials are scarce, and factory workers are being pulled between building cars and building tanks. In the suburbs, young families are moving into modest Cape Cod homes with their 2.5 kids, part of what we now call the baby boom. And in driveways across America, there sits a car that perfectly captured this moment in history, the Ford Mainline. Now you might be thinking, the Mainline? Never heard of it? That's exactly why we're here today. This wasn't the flashy Thunderbird or the luxurious Lincoln. The Mainline was Ford's entry-level model, the working man's Ford. But don't let that fool you. This unpretentious sedan helped define what the American dream looked like in the 1950s. It was the car that got your grandfather to his factory job, the car that carried your grandmother to the new supermarket, the car that sat in the church parking lot every Sunday. Today, we're going to uncover 13 shocking facts about the 1952 Ford Mainline that reveal why this forgotten car was actually one of the most important vehicles Ford ever built. Let's get started. Fact 1. The Mainline launched during one of the worst years for car production. Here's something most people don't realize. 1952 was an absolutely brutal year to be selling cars. The Korean War had started in June 1950, and by 1952, the U.S. government had imposed strict production quotas on automakers. They wanted steel and copper diverted to defense production, building tanks, aircraft, and weapons. Vehicle production across the entire industry had dropped by a staggering 1.3 million units in 1951 compared to 1950. Then, in 1952, with price controls added on top of quotas, production fell by another million units. Think about that. In just 2 years, the American auto industry lost over 2 million units of production capacity. Yet, despite all these restrictions, Ford managed to produce 671,733 automobiles in 1952. And of those, 163,911 were mainlines. That's nearly a quarter of Ford's entire production going to their cheapest, most basic model. Why? Because working Americans needed affordable transportation, war or no war. The Mainline wasn't just a car, it was an essential tool for families trying to build their post-war lives. Fact 2. Ford beat Chevrolet to market by a full year. In the eternal battle between Ford and Chevrolet, timing is everything. And in 1952, Ford scored a major victory. They introduced completely new models for 1952, beating their arch-rival Chevrolet to the punch by a full model year. This wasn't just about being first. The 1952 redesign gave Ford a modern look that Chevrolet couldn't match until 1953. While Chevy drivers were still dealing with the previous generation styling, Ford owners had something fresh and contemporary. That one-year advantage helped Ford stay competitive even as Chevrolet was outselling them in overall numbers. For the Mainline specifically, this meant entering the market as a modern, up-to-date vehicle rather than an outdated leftover. First impressions matter, and the Mainline made a strong one. Fact 3. The revolutionary mileage maker. Engine changed everything. Under the hood of every base model 1952 Ford Mainline sat something truly revolutionary: the new mileage maker 6-cylinder engine. This wasn't just another engine, it represented Ford's biggest technological leap forward since the flathead V8. The mileage maker displaced 215 cubic inches and produced 101 horsepower at 3,500 RPM. But here's what made it special. This was Ford's first overhead valve six-cylinder engine. The old flathead design that had been used since 1941 was finally retired in favor of modern OHV technology. The new engine featured a deep-skirted block, 4 main bearings, and a Holley one-barrel carburetor with 7.0.1 compression. Now, here's the shocking part. Even though the optional flathead V8 was rated at 110 horsepower, 9 more horses than the 6, automotive magazines at the time reported that the mileage maker 6 was actually quicker in 0 to 60 tests. How? The 6 had a lower, broader torque curve that delivered more usable power in everyday driving. It was more responsive off the line and more efficient with fuel. Henry Ford I had never liked six-cylinder engines. He'd sold them briefly from 1906 to 1908 with the Model K, then spent decades building only 4 cylinders and V8s. But by 1952, the old man had been gone for 5 years, and Ford Motor Company was finally ready to embrace modern engineering. The mileage maker proved that Ford could build a 6-cylinder engine that actually worked. Fact 4. The Mainline was designed to be dirt cheap. Let's talk money. In 1952, a base Ford Mainline 2-door sedan cost $1,390. The 4-door version started at $1,629. To put that in perspective, that's about $1,800 to $19,700 in today's dollars. But here's the thing. Ford achieved that rock-bottom price through ruthless cost-cutting. The Mainline's interior was Spartanly equipped with just 1 sun visor instead of 2. Only the driver's door got an armrest. The horn was a button, not a ring. Window moldings were rubber instead of chrome. There was no fancy trim, no extra bright work, no frills whatsoever. Above the Mainline sat the ID mid-level custom line, priced from $1,570 to $2,060. That extra few $100s bought you things like a second sun visor, passenger side armrest, chrome horn ring, and more decorative trim. At the top was the Crest line, available only with V8 power and featuring even more luxury touches. But for families on tight budgets, and remember, this was still the early post-war years when many people were just getting back on their feet, the Mainline offered genuine Ford quality and reliability at a price they could actually afford. It was basic, but it was honest, and that's exactly what working Americans needed. Fact 5. The design had actual jet-age styling. Despite its budget price tag, the 1952 Mainline wasn't some ugly duckling. Ford's designers gave it genuine jet-age style that reflected America's growing fascination with aviation technology. The Mainline featured a completely redesigned body, Ford's first major update since the revolutionary 1949 models. Up front, you had protruding round parking lights styled to look like jet engine intakes. The grille sported a distinctive round 3-bladed spinner in the center, surrounded by a chrome ring. The designers called these corner markers jet intakes, and they weren't subtle about the airplane inspiration. Perhaps most dramatically, the 1952 Mainline was one of the first Ford models to feature a one-piece curved windshield. This might not sound revolutionary now, but in 1952, it was cutting edge. That wraparound glass gave the car a modern, streamlined appearance that the older split windshield design couldn't match. Out back, there was a full-width rear window and sculptured rear fenders with simulated air intakes. Inside, Ford installed what they called a flight-style control panel. Even the pedals were suspended from below the dashboard rather than mounted to the floor. Another aircraft-inspired design choice. The whole package was meant to evoke the excitement of modern aviation, bringing a touch of the jet age to America's driveways. For a car designed to be affordable, the Mainline looked genuinely good. It had style and presence. And that mattered to buyers who wanted to feel proud of their purchase, even if they couldn't afford the top-of-the-line model. Fact 6. The Mainline could be ordered with America's first modern automatic transmission. Here's where the Mainline gets really interesting. For an extra $170, about $2,058 in today's money, you could order your budget Ford with the Ford O-Matic automatic transmission. This transmission was huge news. Ford had finally introduced its first true automatic transmission partway through the 1951 model year, more than a decade after GM's successful Hydra-Matic. The Ford O-Matic was a 3-speed Borg-Warner-derived design that brought the convenience of automatic shifting to Ford's lineup. What's shocking is that this modern technology was available even on the cheapest mainline models. You didn't need to buy the expensive Crestline to get an automatic. A working-class family could walk into a Ford dealer, buy a basic mainline, add the Ford O-Matic option, and drive home in a car with the latest transmission technology. This democratization of automotive technology was quintessentially American. Ford wasn't reserving their innovations for the wealthy. They were making them available to everyone who could scrape together the option price, and thousands of buyers took advantage of it. Fact 7. The Mainline Ranch Wagon was America's most affordable station wagon. If you needed to haul kids and cargo, Ford offered the Mainline Ranch Wagon, a 2-door, all-steel station wagon that seated 6 passengers. And here's the kicker. It was the lowest-priced station wagon on the American market in 1952. Priced at just $1,932 for the base model, the Ranch Wagon undercut competitors significantly. It featured a stowaway rear bench that folded flat, creating a continuous cargo floor approximately 8 feet long. The design prioritized versatility with standard roof rails for additional cargo securement. Unlike the upscale Country Squire with its fancy wood trim, or later simulated wood vinyl panels, the Ranch Wagon was utterly plain. No wood, no frills, just practical, honest transportation. And you know what? It outsold the fancier Country Squire. Why? Because most families didn't need a status symbol. They needed a vehicle that could haul groceries, lumber, kids, camping gear, and everything else suburban life demanded. The Ranch Wagon perfectly captured the utilitarian spirit of the Mainline line. It did exactly what it needed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. And it did it cheaper than anyone else. Fact 8. The Mainline was built for the suburban explosion. 1952 was a watershed year in American demographics. The suburbs were exploding. Between 1946 and 1964, America experienced the baby boom, averaging 4.6 million births per year. By 1952, 2.4 million veterans had already received government-backed home loans through the GI Bill, and they were flooding into newly built suburban developments. William Levitt had pioneered mass-produced suburban housing with his Levitt Towns, entire communities of affordable, cookie-cutter homes built on former farmland outside New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. By 1952, developers across the country were copying his formula. Suddenly, young families who had lived in cramped city apartments could afford their own homes on their own land, with backyards for their kids and garages for their cars. The Ford Mainline was perfectly positioned for this demographic shift. These suburban families needed cars, not luxury vehicles, but reliable, affordable transportation to get dad to work, mom to the new shopping centers, and the kids to school. The Mainline provided exactly that. Those modest 800-square-foot Cape Cod houses that defined early suburbia? The Mainline was parked in their driveways. The new shopping malls springing up on the outskirts of cities? Mainlines filled their parking lots. The church parking lots on Sunday mornings? You'd see row after row of mainlines, custom lines, and their competitors. This car wasn't just transportation, it was the vehicle of post-war American optimism. It represented the ability to own both a home and a car, to raise a family in comfort and security. That's why more than 163,000 families chose the Mainline in 1952 alone. Fact 9. The interior was brutally Spartan, and buyers didn't care. Let's be honest about what you got inside a base Mainline. The interior was stripped down to the absolute essentials. One sun visor, one armrest on the driver's side only, a horn button instead of a horn ring, rubber window moldings instead of chrome, a single bench seat with durable but plain upholstery. The dashboard featured basic instrumentation, a speedometer, gas gauge, temperature gauge, and oil pressure gauge. That was standard. If you wanted a clock or radio, those were positioned in the center of the dash, and you paid extra for them. There were no power windows, no power locks, no power seats. Air conditioning? Not available at any price on the Mainline. The optional magic air heater and defroster was about as luxurious as the climate control got. But here's what's remarkable. Buyers didn't care. Or rather, they cared about something more important than luxury. They cared about value. The Mainline gave them a genuine Ford-built automobile with proven reliability, modern styling, and decent performance, all at a price they could actually afford. That mattered more than a second sun visor or fancy trim. This was the 1950s, remember. People who had lived through the Great Depression and World War II didn't take transportation for granted. They remembered making do with far less. A brand new car with a warranty, even a basic one, felt like prosperity. The Mainline simplicity wasn't a liability. It was honesty in automotive form. Fact 10. You could personalize your Mainline with an expansive options list. While the base Mainline was stripped down, Ford offered a surprisingly long list of optional equipment that allowed buyers to customize their cars according to their needs and budgets. Some of the options included an illuminated vanity mirror, engine compartment light, color-keyed rubber floor mats, wheel disc covers, handbrake signal lamp, rear fender skirts, rocker panel trim strips, the magic air heater and defroster system we mentioned earlier, the 3-speed manual transmission with automatic overdrive, and of course, the Ford-O-Matic automatic transmission. What this meant was that two Mainlines sitting side by side at a stoplight might look similar but be equipped quite differently. One might be absolutely bare bones, manual transmission, no radio, minimal trim. The other might have the automatic, a radio, fender skirts, and other add-ons that made it nearly as comfortable as a more expensive custom line. This option strategy was brilliant. It allowed Ford to advertise a very low base price to get customers into showrooms, then let them build up the car to match their personal needs and budgets. A buyer could start with that $1,390 base price and add just the features they actually wanted, rather than being forced to buy a more expensive trim level loaded with features they didn't need. It was democratic consumerism at its finest, putting the buyer in control of exactly what they purchased. Fact 11. The Mainline outlasted many of its competitors. The Ford Mainline lasted from 1952 through 1956, 5 model years. That might not seem impressive until you consider what was happening to Ford's competitors during the same period. The independent automakers who had thrived during the immediate post-war years were starting to struggle badly. Kaiser Frazer, Hudson, Nash, Packard, and Studebaker, all these once proud brands were fighting for survival. By the late 1950s, most of them would be gone or absorbed into larger companies. Why did they fail while Ford thrived? Partly because Ford had the scale to compete in all market segments. They could offer a budget Mainline, a mid-range custom line, a luxury crest line, and still have resources left over for trucks and specialty models like the Thunderbird. The independents couldn't match that breadth. But there's another reason. Ford understood that the bulk of the American market wanted basic, reliable, affordable transportation. The Mainline wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what most families needed. Some of the independents tried to compete on style and innovation rather than price and practicality. That worked for a while, but when the market got competitive and the economy tightened, buyers gravitated toward the safety of the Big Three's mainstream models. The Mainline's 5-year run proved that Ford had read the market correctly. When they finally discontinued the Mainline name for 1957, replacing it with the Ford Custom as part of a model line consolidation, it was because the market had evolved, not because the Mainline had failed. Over 1 million Mainlines reached American roads during those 5 years, a massive success by any measure. Fact 12. The Mainline pioneered features that would become standard. Despite being the budget model, the Mainline was actually a testing ground for technologies that would eventually spread throughout Ford's lineup and the industry as a whole. We've already mentioned the overhead valve mileage maker engine, which represented Ford's first modern 6-cylinder. That engine family would evolve and remain in production for years, eventually becoming standard equipment across Ford's car and truck lines. The one-piece curved windshield was another innovation that debuted on the 1952 models. Within a few years, it became standard across the industry. Today, we take wraparound windshields for granted, but in 1952, it was cutting-edge design. The suspended pedal arrangement hanging the pedals from above, rather than mounting them to the floor, improved ergonomics and foot comfort during long drives. It also made the car easier to clean and maintain. This design philosophy would influence Ford's approach to interior packaging for decades. Even the K-bar ladder frame with 5 crossmembers that underpinned the 1952 models represented an improvement in chassis design. The engineers had revised the suspension geometry, upgraded the springs and dampers, stretched the wheelbase to 115 inches, and widened the track from 56 to 58 inches for better stability. All of these improvements showed up first on the 1952 models, Mainline included. The point is this: Ford didn't cheap out on engineering even for their budget model. The Mainline got the same fundamental improvements as the more expensive models. It might have had fewer luxury touches, but the bones were solid. Fact 13. The Mainline became a symbol of working-class pride. Here's the final most important fact about the 1952 Ford Mainline. It became a symbol of working-class dignity and pride. This wasn't a car for corporate executives or doctors or lawyers. This was a car for factory workers, shop owners, salesmen, teachers, and young families just starting out. The people who bought Mainlines weren't trying to impress anyone. They were trying to get to work, provide for their families, and maybe take the kids to the drive-in on Saturday night. But you know what? They took pride in their Mainlines. They kept them clean and well-maintained. They mowed their lawns and washed their cars every weekend. They participated in the emerging suburban culture where keeping up appearances mattered, even if you couldn't afford the fanciest house or car on the block. The Mainline represented something quintessentially American, the idea that hard work and modest means could still lead to a good life. You didn't need to be rich to own a new car with modern features. You didn't need to be wealthy to provide your family with reliable transportation. The Mainline proved that the American dream was accessible to regular working people. In many ways, the Mainline was more authentic than the flashier, more expensive models of its era. It wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. It wasn't pretending to offer luxury it didn't have. It was honest, straightforward, and capable, just like the people who bought it. Today, when you see a restored 1952 Ford Mainline at a car show, understand that you're looking at more than just a vintage automobile. You're seeing a piece of American social history. You're seeing the car that carried a generation of Americans through the prosperous but complicated 1950s. You're seeing the vehicle that defined what middle-class life looked like in post-war America. So there you have it, 13 shocking facts about the 1952 Ford Mainline, the car that defined American life in the early 1950s. We've learned that this modest Ford was born in the midst of war rationing and material shortages, yet still managed to bring modern technology and jet-age styling to working-class buyers. We've discovered that it pioneered innovations like the overhead valve 6-cylinder engine and one-piece curved windshield. We've seen how it perfectly matched the needs of America's exploding suburban population. And most importantly, we've understood why it became a symbol of working-class dignity and the American dream. The Mainline might not have the name recognition of the Thunderbird or Mustang. It might not be as valuable as a Crestline Victoria at auction today. But in its own way, the Mainline was more important than any of those flashier models. It put reliable, modern transportation within reach of ordinary Americans during one of the most transformative periods in our nation's history. Now, I want to hear from you. Did your family own a Ford Mainline? Do you remember riding in one as a kid? Maybe your grandfather drove one to work every day, or your parents learned to drive in one. Share your stories in the comments below. These cars touched millions of lives, and each one has a story worth telling. Your memories help keep this history alive and strengthen our community of automotive enthusiasts. If you enjoyed learning about this forgotten piece of American automotive history, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the cars that shaped America. We've got more fascinating stories coming your way about the vehicles you thought you knew, but really didn't. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and the rubber side down. We'll see you in the next video.